Shalom from Israel, I'm Ariel Ben Abraham. This week we are going to reflect on chapter 16 of the book of Psalms by King David. Verse 1, keep me safe, my God, for in you I take refuge. Before we have been saying in the last few weeks, when David is saying or calling God our refuge, this is not about necessarily a place, a shelter kind of idea. It's like, okay, I'm in a storm, God is my shelter. It's like when I'm in trouble, He's my protector. It's usually understood in that way, which is one of the ways we understand the verse. But also we have to go a little beyond the meaning of shelter, refuge. Usually a place related to protection, like a sanctuary kind of place, safe haven. But we have to understand that this is essential to go beyond the idea of protection. It's like we're unprotected. So we indeed are protected. The fact that we are alive, that we have air in order to breathe and be alive, that's a protection by itself. See, when we don't have life, then there is nothing to protect. So let's take the idea of refuge and protection as something that exists by default. With God. With God. We have to emphasize that. Why? Because out there it's not that safe. We know that. So when David is calling God his refuge, he is acknowledging that God is everything we have. So he's counting on God's protection, like acknowledging God's protection. So it's not asking. Yeah, we may ask for God's protection when we are unable to protect ourselves. Of course, we must. We have to go beyond the idea of the shield, of the armor, of the refuge, the shelter. We have to be aware that all the time God is with us. And the fact that He's with us, that He's given us life, that He's sustaining our life, is the premise to recognize that He is indeed our protector. In other words, let's not try to put the protection thing in a circumstantial way. It's like, if I am in danger, God is my protector. So we have to assume that protection permanently. So let's understand, in you I take refuge, God. It's like, in my awareness of your presence in my life, I am protected. I'm saved. I'm safe. So this has to be like a mantra in our consciousness. Is to be aware that God is with us all the time. Not only when we need Him for protection. But after saying this preamble, we go to verse 2. David continues, and again, let's pay attention when David starts with something. It's like, as we said, the preamble, the premise, to say something else. So it's contextual. So let's never forget about the context in which things are said. And again, we have to go beyond the literal meaning. We have to expand our consciousness, especially if we are reflecting on our connection, bond with God, which is infinite, who is infinite. And in this bond also is infinite by the fact that God is infinite. We were reading the other day poetry of some Israeli poets. One of them, by the last name of Amihai, who was not a religious person, was a secular Jew. He called Jerusalem a seaport, or a port, a city port, excuse me, a city port in the sea of eternity. And it's interesting that a non-religious person would describe Jerusalem such as, that's exactly what it is. But let's go beyond the poetic image that Jerusalem is a city port in the Sea of Eternity. It's like the fact that is a port is a connection with eternity. It's connected already with eternity. So in this case, the eternal city is not Rome, as it's usually called, but Jerusalem. So the moment that we're in touch with eternity, the moment that we're in touch with God, that we have a bond, a connection, a link, you are connected to eternity. So let's understand it that way. We're not limiting eternity to our conception, our limit understanding. It's all the way around. We have to put ourselves in function of something eternal. And by the fact that it's eternal, it's undescribable, undefinable. It's God. And we're talking about the God of the Jews, obviously. Because the other gods, they have a definition. Look like a man, etc., etc. We don't have that. So we're dealing here with a concept, which is, again, it's a contradiction because there is not a concept of God, but an idea of an eternal, undescribable, undefinable God. Then we really have no idea what this is. However, we know that we come from Him. And there's a connection. And this connection is the refuge that David is talking about. So, verse 2, I say to the Lord, you are my Lord, you are my God. Apart from you, I have no good thing. So I'm always insisting in the fact of the premise of what David was saying before. It's my refuge. He's my God. He's my creator, from whom everything good comes. I don't get anything good except from God. It's a very major statement that King David is doing here, what he's saying that. It's like the only goodness that I can conceive comes from you. Nobody can give me the goodness that you give me. Now, we have to reflect, to think what David is saying. Well, he's not getting anything good from anything else but God. But you may say, my mother is good to me, my spouse is good to me, my friends are good to me, my children are good to me. It's like, why David is saying, apart from you, I have no good thing. So we're talking about something absolute, obviously. Your God is absolute. It's not relative, it's absolute. So David is saying, anything good, life included, comes from you. You are the only giver of life. Therefore, you are the only giver of goodness. From your goodness, we give. He said that later in another book. From your hand, we give from your hand. That's the way it is. So everything we think, everything we create, if we're artists or intellectuals or scientists, it's not coming from our mind, it's coming from God. So we have to be humble to acknowledge that. And be thankful that we are the means to reveal part of God's creation. The inventions, we're talking about the inventions here. So when we see cars, when we see computers, oh, so and so designed this computer, yes. But again, it's an expression of God's creation, because that person who developed these inventions was created by God. So that makes us humble and grateful. We have to spread gratitude to be the means to create something innovation, something innovating, something better for us to share in life. Then we acknowledge God for this, not us. This makes sense. So David, this is what David is talking about. Apart from you, I have no good thing. Like everything that is good comes from you, even if other people are giving this goodness. Ultimately, everything comes from you. But David is talking about goodness in this particular case. Verse 3, I say to the holy people who are in the land, he's calling Israel holy. They are the noble ones in whom is all my delight. He's quoting God saying that on the Torah. God delights in his people, Israel. So David is saying all the goodness that we have of God's people comes from you, from God. He called it holy. He's saying we're holy because we're holy for you. You said that. Therefore we are celebrating, we're being grateful to God because we are his creation in which he delights. He's happy to have created us. That's very nice. Verse 4, those who run after other gods will suffer more and more. I will not pour our libations of blood in such gods, or take up their names on my lips. So David is making a clear reference against idolatry, which is the second commandment from the Ten Commandments. Why? Because everything, again, is connected to what is said before, it's juxtaposed. Everything good comes from God. Anything not good is not coming from him. Therefore, it has to come from other source. What are those other sources? Gods, false gods and idols. Now, what are those gods and idols that we don't see? I mean, it's mentioned in the Torah, they're mentioned in the Torah, they're mentioned by David. What are those? What are those idols? Why God is telling us, don't follow idols. Don't have any other images. Don't have other gods besides me. Why is saying that? We have elaborated a lot in our blog regarding this, in our commentaries on the Torah, commentaries on the Messianic consciousness in Jewish prophecy. This is very, 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 very important, because those gods and those idols are our own invention. They don't exist. The only existing God, one and only, is God. Is our God. The one and only one God. We don't see what are those other gods. We don't see them. We may see, oh, it's a giant God that is floating in this mountain in Northern Asia or South Africa or something. It doesn't exist. All these invisible forces that some magician invoke, and in some cults, like this primitive cults that people do in order to get the influence of the gods and these forces of nature and that. We still don't see them. It's based on belief. You say, oh, I believe that something is here, is invisible, and is taking over me, and is influencing my behavior, and is providing me with food and shelter. Everything. If we create in those, if we believe, if we believe in those, it's our own creation. Now you may say, but how stupid would it be to invent a god? They say, well, we're not talking about this kind of gods that are powerful with a long beard floating somewhere and, killing people and sending rays and thunderbolts and the kind of thing. No. We're talking about egos, fantasies, and illusions. Those are the idols. What we desire. We're talking desire, we're talking about desire at the expense or detriment of others. Like lusting, coveting, even emotional states like wrath, arrogance, like feeling superior to others. Then we have a problem here. Those are the idols. People adore being arrogant. People adore being indifferent. People adore being envious of other people. People adore to be lusty. People adore to covet, etc. Many things. And again, it had to do with manipulation, it had to do with control, it had to do with power, it had to do with attachment to things that we want, it had to do either with food, sex, ideas, ideologies. So many people crazy around believing in things that are wrong. So those are the idols. And usually they don't give anything good. They take the goodness out of us and others, based on the illusion that we're controlling and possessing. So, let's pay attention to this. So, David is making us a warning about this. It's like, those who run after them, in other words, those who forget about God's goodness. We're talking about the Torah, we're talking about the commandments, we're talking about God's ways and attributes that are all based, as we have mentioned many times, expressed or rooted in His love. So we're talking about love's ways and attributes also. So he said the moment that we are detached from this goodness from which we come from, then we start following something different. What is that different? We have to create that. It doesn't exist outside. We can say, oh, there's another God over there, I'm going to go to this one. It's huge, it's floating in the air, looking down to us. No, we have to create it. And again, we create out of either a sense, belief, or feeling of lack. Then we start creating things. And we believe them, and we get attached to them, and we get addicted to them. Those are the false idols. So when David is saying, I'm not going to pour my libations of blood to such gods or take their names in my life, David is saying, I don't want to relate anything that I use my life for. That's the so-called sacrifices of blood. It's like our lives. Now when we do sacrifices that bring to the temple, that we bring an animal, the blood of the animal, that's basically what he's referring. Which represent, again, our life. So we are offering our lives, elevating our lives to God. We're not killing ourselves. So let's admit it. We're using the animal as a symbol. So like we are applying ourselves to God, dedicating ourselves to God, elevating ourselves to God. And by elevating, we're talking about the best we have in life, the best we have in consciousness, the higher consciousness we may acquire. We put it at the service of goodness, the service of God. So David is saying, I'm not going to put anything, my intellect, my discernment, my emotions, my mind, my feelings, my instincts, my passions, in anything different than God's ways and attributes. So I'm not going to put in my lips the names of being, coveting, envious, lusty, indifferent, indolent, all the negative trends and traits in consciousness. That is saying, I don't want to deal with those. No. And I'm not going to give my life to things that are not good to me, because the only goodness that I have is God. That is what is the meaning of this important verse 4. We go now to verse 5. Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. Again, is the repeating. This first is David's refuge. God is David's refuge. Now he's saying, you are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. Talking about safety here, as the meanings that we were exploring at the beginning of these reflections. But again, when David is saying my portion and my cup, so what is the portion? Is that the reason we have to live? Like what we depend on to live, our values, our principles, that's God. And our existence depends on Him also. So what is the cup here? What we drink from? We're drinking from a cup. Cup. So we're drinking from. What we drink will give us life. So David is calling God, I drink from you, from your spirit, from what you give me to survive and to be happy. Usually, cup is related to pouring wine. And wine is related in the Jewish tradition to happiness. We celebrate with wine. We consecrate with wine. Okay. Verse 6. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely, I have a delightful inheritance. David is acknowledging God for everything David has. So he's saying, my life is pleasant. Everything that you have given me is pleasant. See, I have no boundaries. They have fallen. Why? The place I am is endless. And it's endlessly pleasant. Why? Because it's God's place. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. The portion, the lot, the inheritance is God. It's just my portion, as he mentioned before. 7. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night, my heart instructs me to praise Him. So David is again being grateful by acknowledging God's presence portion in his life. It's beautiful. And it's at night, like even when I'm not doing anything, I'm resting. My consciousness, my heart, the love in my awareness of life is telling me, is instructing me, is teaching me that God is all. It's beautiful, really. 8. I keep my eyes always on the Lord. It's very important. With Him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. It's not about this self-convincement or conviction that God is everything, it's my refuge, it's my portion, it's my lot, it's my inheritance, it's my security, it's my reason for life, it's my delight, it's my pleasantness. David is going beyond. He's with me in everything good I do. Why he's saying the right hand? He's saying, when I do something good, God is with me. You could say my hands, plural. But using the right hand, and again, when the Torah, the Jewish Bible, if you read it, especially in the last book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, talking about a lot of the hand of God, the hand of God, the hand of God. We're talking about the goodness of God. And it's related to goodness, by the way. Always. At the end of the Jewish prayer, every prayer we do, every day, including Shabbat, we say, we're talking about the standing prayer. At the end, after we finish, we ask Him, we're acknowledging, we thank Him. And we're asking to guide us. It's like, we have been with you, please guide us for after this. Give us peace, give us completion, in order to go. Take away our enemies, who are conspiring against us, get me closer to you, Torah. Actually, by the way, everything that is said in that particular prayer is taken from David. And at some point we say, do it for the sake of your name, for the sake of your Torah, for the sake of your righteousness, and for the sake of your right hand. So we're asking God's love to protect us, basically. It's like all the goodness that God is. For the sake of your sanctity, Torah, and as we say, right hand. All those things are synonyms. The Torah, His right hand, His name, that which defines Him. Not defines, it identifies us. Identifies Him to us. We cannot define Him as we know. So we talk about the name of God. So we don't put a name. This is you, and we're talking about attributes that the Torah is telling us that God has. And those attributes is goodness, love. The greatest love of all. God's love. That's what we call our blog that way. God's love. So, I will not be shaken, said David at the end. It's like, what do I have to be? What do I have to be afraid of? What I have to doubt? What I have to question? There's nothing to question here. And again, he said, I keep my eyes always on the Lord. It's like, I don't want to separate from goodness. Why should I have to go to something that is not good? So David is telling you, let's be smart. Let's stay with God always. Look at Him. And again, if I don't look at Him, we cannot look at Him. So what is looking at God? It's looking at goodness. Put it in a simple way, practical way. We can understand it in our material reality. It's always. So our eyes are in goodness, God's ways and attributes. Then we will not be shaken. And again, with Him at my right hand, it's like I have to make sure that everything I'm doing is good. So God is with me all the time. 9. Therefore, my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, safe. It's like goodness is our happiness, our fulfillment, our full satisfaction, our plenitude, our abundance, our delight. our pleasantness, our peace. That we have to pursue that state of consciousness all the time. This is looking at God all the time. It's like pursuing peace, goodness, everything that is related to goodness, love's ways and attributes. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My consciousness, my heart, my awareness of the goodness that I am, my heart, that's having a good heart, being loving, being attuned with goodness. And my tongue rejoices, meaning I speak joy, I'm happy, I'm expressing my happiness with words and also actions. My body also rests secure. This is nothing to be afraid of. This is our freedom. Freedom really is about safety. We're not free, we're not safe. So for those who believe that they live in a free country and or like a civilized city or something like that, and they have to put security cameras and fences, and what kind of freedom is that? Really, think about it. So then we realize that our real freedom is inside. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to go and put ourselves in danger in an unsafe place. No, we're not talking about this. We're talking about keeping the awareness that our freedom is our goodness, that our abundance is our goodness, our love, that our peace, everything good we have, the freedom we have is goodness, love. This is very, very, very important. 10, because you will not abandon me to the grave, to the netherworld, to the land of the dead. Realm of the dead is here. Nor will you let your faithful one see decay. So in other words, in goodness, there's nothing that can kill us. There's nothing that, even if we, Hasbi Shalom, we lose life, our lives, we know we're still alive. Because we have been living in goodness. So we're not even afraid of dying. If we get a terminal illness or anything like that, so we don't have to be afraid of, because we know that we live in goodness. We're not afraid of anything. It's okay, life ended, so what? Still, I'm with God. God is with me. So for those who are afraid of dying, no, just concentrate in goodness. And try to get this goodness everywhere, even beyond this physical body. Because that's what we are. That's our essence. That's what is transcendent. That's what is transcends time, space, matter, everything. This is what we're talking about. David is calling our attention to this. Because when we are with God, we're not abandoned to non-life, non-goodness, which is death in this case. Which is also physical death, but we have to understand it in a wider spectrum. So what death when we're living in egos, fantasies, and illusions? What death when we are coveting, when we're lusting, when we're indifferent, when we're indolent, when we're cruel, when we're arrogant? And we know we're dead. We're alone. As if resting, lying on a grave. So let's think about that. And he say, you don't let your faithful one, I was talking about, David is talking about himself, in decay. It's like, you don't want to allow me decay. If I'm good and I'm with you all the time, you don't want to let me fall. Why? Goodness, love, don't leave anybody fall. I mean, let anybody fall. Why? Because it's fulfilling, it's relieving, it's freeing, it's freedom. Love is freedom. So therefore, we don't have to be afraid of decay, of dying, of getting corrupted. Why would we be corrupted if we are good? I mean, living in goodness. Impossible. We're choosing goodness, the righteousness of goodness and love. Therefore, why are we to be corrupted? No. And again, David is connecting God to goodness. It's very important. You will not abandon me in the realm of God. Goodness doesn't abandon us as long as we keep in goodness. Nor will you let your faithful one see decay. Last verse 11, to finish this reflection on chapter 16. You make known to me the path of life. You're telling me what life is and how we live it. You will fill me with joy in your presence. If we're in the presence of God, what else we're going to experience? Of course, joy, completion, wholesomeness. This is what we got. That is wholesome, complete. Also, it's one God. It's not breaking up. It's one God. With eternal pleasures at your right hand. You see, the pleasures that we find are really, the genuine pleasures are really in goodness. We know that. So we want joy, we want happiness, we want laughter. Because that's what is good. We don't want to be depressed, we don't want to be crying, we don't want to be so, of course not. So this is what David is saying. So everything that is good attracts all these qualities of goodness. Joy, laughter, fulfillment, happiness, plenitude, abundance, freedom, real freedom. Let's repeat once more. You make known to me the path of life. Goodness is the path of life. David later said, we have mentioned that many times, Hodu Hashem ki tov ki olam has done. We have to thank God because He's good. See, David dares to define God. Goodness is one of His attributes, but we cannot define Him. But He dares, and you God. Your loving kindness is eternal, it's endless. So let's thank God because He's good. He's endless. His loving kindness is endless. It's beautiful. So this is what David is saying in a different way with different words. You make me know the path of life, the goodness of life. You will fill me with joy. In your presence. This goodness is about joy. You know, I was wondering the presence of God was like this, or no, happy. A happiness that is actually undescribable, because God is undescribable. With eternal pleasures at your right hand, again the right hand. All the pleasures come from goodness, God's love. The goodness comes from God's love. Everything comes from God's love. So let's be reminded once again to finish this commentary that we are God's creation. But it's not just like robots or machines or computers or anything. Like we're talking about, we're coming from God's love. We're sustained, this life, this world, His creation is sustained by His love, by His goodness. Therefore, the lesson here is that David is telling us, and God is telling us, through David, is to hold on in the awareness, the permanent awareness, that we come from goodness, and we have to pursue goodness. The lesson is to pursue goodness. To take the right side, the right hand of life. The loving kindness of life. The delight of being alive. And not the opposite. So with this, we wish you an abundantly blessed week. Shabbat Shalom. And until next week, when we will reflecting on chapter 17 of the book of Psalms by King David. So until next time.